Here we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Clubhouse. We meet every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, except not next Tuesday. It's the 4th of July. Happy almost 4th of July. But today we are going to continue with the theme of PTSD, or as we like to call it, PTSI Awareness Month. We had some questions last time that didn't get answered, so we're gonna start with those.
Okay.
And as we said in our recent newsletter article, we like to call it post-traumatic stress injury because post-traumatic stress disorder really kind of demonizes the person with a struggle. If you get a gunshot wound, you don't have a gunshot disorder, you have an injury. And if you have post-traumatic stress, you don't have a disorder, you have an injury. And it is a psychological injury. And we want to honor that by, well, we're not big on labels around the art lab, but I think that it does more justice to the struggle calling it an injury than a disorder. What are your guys' thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it provides more hope. You know, the words that we say are very powerful. And when you think disorder, you think, wow, this is something that's just going to be here forever, you know, the rest of my life. But when you think injury, injuries heal over time.
Yes, that's true.
And there's lots of steps that can be taken with post-traumatic stress in order to heal and to have a continuing, more meaningful life.
I think injury, too, to me, comes across like something happened to me instead of there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Disorder sounds more like there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And
I also like the, I don't know, it kind of, it does set it up for more of a healing mentality, and that's something that I'm cursed with forever. This is one of my disagreements with a lot of 12-step programs is once you have an addiction, you always have an addiction. Once you have alcoholism, you always have alcoholism. It makes about as much sense to me that if you've ever shoplifted at Walmart, you're always a thief. Or if you've done something you ought not, that you're always described by that behavior. And the thing about calling it an injury, I think it really does present a much improved picture of the future that, as Sarah said, that you can heal from it. And it is a healing process, step by step by step. But let's get to the question, and then we'll use what time we have after the question. And thank you guys for sending those questions in to us. You can always send your questions to therapybites@yahoo.com. That is therapybites@yahoo.com. Therapybites@yahoo.com. I'll say that 3 times so we can all get it. Don't write that down if you're driving. Just replay the episode. The other thing is you can text it to 1-870-686-4196. That's 1-870-686-4196. And we always love to hear from our audience and our listeners, as we call them T-ballers. Therapy Bites Art Lab, or in this case, Therapy Bites Art Labbers. Debbie, what's those questions that we had?
all right. So we have another question from last week. It says, what is your position on the place for, quote, bottom-up approaches in PTSI treatment, specifically for individuals who have experienced multiple traumas over extended period of time, live chronically, quote, activated in more of an automated existence, and most of their inaccurate thinking at the implicit level well below their conscious awareness?
Gosh, what a really great question. There's so many moving parts there. It's almost looking at a clockwork mechanism. But let me specify for those of you that may not know what implicit processing is. Above the surface or above the waves of consciousness of what we're aware of, are things like I have my hands on my head. I may realize my shirt is yellow. But then things kind of move in and out of explicit awareness, things that I know, to implicit awareness, things that I may not know that I know, or I may just not be thinking about having a yellow shirt at the moment. And I may put a shirt on in the morning and then forget I even have a shirt on, unless for some reason an alien or somebody vaporized my shirt and it disappeared. I might realize I'm half naked. So things are kind of fluid in the brain, and implicit processing is where really trauma really lives. So to put a finer edge on that, what we do in therapy is we try to bring some of that implicit processing that is off camera, if you're watching us on camera, that is off camera, on camera, because see, then we can do something about it. Think of it like a puzzle that's in a puzzle box in a cabinet which is locked with a key. And therapy should be like the key that unlocks the cabinet, and the journey with the clinician is actually pulling at the puzzle box, not the clinician pulling at the puzzle box, but you bringing the puzzle box to your therapy session and unpacking it and laying all the pieces out, and then you collaborate with a clinician to kind of put those pieces together. Now, what are those pieces? Those pieces are how we decide to think about the trauma that happened. So it's often said that what's in the past sabotages us. And the way the human brain is structured is things are infinitely, inalienably in the present, because we can't time travel. How we're functioning now is based on how we're thinking about things now, not what happened in the past. And you might say, well, but they happened in the past. Yes, they did. But how they're impacting you now is how you're thinking about them now, no matter when they happen. You can actually think about things that haven't happened and say or think that will happen in the future, but you're still thinking about them in the eternal now, because we can't live in the future and we can't live in the past. You hear people talk about living in the past. We can't do that. If you can do that, then go back and invest some money for me in the stock market after it crashed, and we'll all be billionaires, trillionaires at this point. But no, you can't do that. We're inextricably bound to the flypaper of the present. And another point that the question referred to is how do you pick that apart? What are some ideas that you had? If we need to reread the question, guys, we can always do that.
Would you like me to reread it?
I think I pretty much remember what the question was, but I mean, picking it apart, a lot of it comes down to our thoughts. And whenever you're first starting trauma therapy, it can be difficult to identify what those thoughts actually are, and you may kind of dance around it for a little while. But I think sometimes, even if you start if you can't do it, we use what's called an ABC approach. So, the activating event, what happened, the B part, which is the belief or the thought, which is the most important section, and then the C, which is a consequence, which is the feeling that you had or the behavior that you took based on that thought. If you're having a hard time, just doing it boom, 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 sometimes you can start with that behavior and think about, okay, where is that behavior coming from? Maybe link it back to something that happened, and then link it to the thought after that and be like, oh, this is the thought that I was having. This is the thought I'm having now. What can I do to change that thought to change that behavior? Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
That sounds perfectly right to me.
Yes,
Perfect meaning complete.
And I think the way that a lot of those come out is through something we call over assimilation.
Yeah.
In the present, something happens and we experience something and we have a strong response to it, and that's how it brings that stuff up. Okay, what's brought this on? And we can, look at, well, what am I thinking about this? Well, I'm, like for instance, just a real common one with the 4th of July coming up, the fireworks. Yes. and combat vets. And what's interesting is it's not always gunfire.
Not just combat vets.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking of what I heard at Beck with the explosions.
Oh, sure. Beck Center, by the way, to those of you that don't know, is a local organization at the local university that focuses on providing services to military veterans. But the point I was making is, if you've been in a car crash, explosions, if you've been in a shooting, the exploding sound of the weapon, firing. I'll even go one more. If you grew up in a house where people were beating each other up, and
The loud
unfortunately, I went through that in my childhood. Slamming doors, loud noises of just sudden increases in decibel level. And I don't want to get into the territory of everything is trauma, because everything is not trauma. But for me, slamming doors, really loud voices, that's a thing for me. And when I say it's a thing for me, I want to say that I have to work mentally very hard to put those things in perspective, even though my initial impression is an alarm, and maybe means I'm not safe in some way, and I'm kind of dragging this out. But realize in the brain, this takes milliseconds. I mean, it is really a millisecond process, and all of a sudden, I mean, I'm ready to fight somebody, and then I realize, no, it's just somebody slammed a door. And then I have to realize that my level of irritation is a defense mechanism because I thought I was in danger. And then I have to remind myself, no, it's just my wife taking the dog out to potty or something. And then it becomes like a bit of what I would call a psychological sunburn, because it just doesn't go away just like that. There are folks that think that if you assess that there's no danger, that the alarm should go away. Well, good luck with that. It certainly doesn't go away for me. I'll sit there and be on edge for hours after that. And by the way, I don't blame. I say I don't blame. Actually, I do blame. I try not to, but I still do it. I really work hard to not blame the person that caused the noise. And here's a curveball for some of you. I also don't tell myself that what they did was a trigger.
Yeah.
I think that is so sabotaging, because that is putting that event out of my control. They control that, but I don't think they do control that. The trigger, if you want to use that terminology, trigger, is how I decide to think about the event. And I can think all kinds of things about it. We've got a really freaky front door, and the lock on it doesn't just unlock, it unlocks with a pop if you're not gentle with it. And the funny thing is, I probably do it myself. I mean, if I'm doing it, I don't notice it as much. You ever notice that if you cause a loud noise, you don't startle yourself?
Right. You know
But
to expect it.
Yeah, because if somebody else causes a large noise, it's kind of like have you ever noticed you can't tickle yourself?
Yeah.
Others can tickle you, but try to tickle yourself sometimes. You can't tickle yourself. And it's kind of the same thing with trauma, is that others do things and we can do exactly the same thing. Now think about that for a moment. If another person, say, sets off a firework, or shoots a weapon for our combat vets. Well, let's start with you. If you're the combat vet and you pull the trigger on a 45 caliber, now that's going to make a big pop. I've got a 45 caliber. It is a boom, because it's a large caliber weapon. I would, if I'm mistaken, you combat vets, you send us letters and you can DM me on social media, on Twitter. It's at therapy_bites. I love getting Twitter messages. But I would guess that you're not going to be alarmed at yourself pulling the trigger. But if somebody else pulls the trigger on a weapon and it goes boom, you'll alert. Well, wait a minute. If it's the same kind of gun and the same decibel level, then the trigger cannot be the event, because it's the same. Well, the trigger then must be in your own brain, what you're deciding to tell yourself about that weapon. And speaking of the building blocks of therapy, what is one thing that we do, even though we have some cranks on Twitter that disagree with us and call us nasty names and make fun of us? That's okay. That just shows people's character on Twitter sometimes. But it is that we have built in a reaction that can be deconstructed. And how do you deconstruct something like that? You have to expose yourself to it.
Right.
Little by little by little, you can expose yourself to it. Now, if you want to get really, really scientific here and really, really step by step, you could actually expose yourself to increasing decibel levels from low to high over a long period of time. Start out with something that's a really, really low decibel level. Do it on your TV, set the volume, expose yourself, and then you'll experience the activation. Then stop the exposure and engage in some relaxation, some mindfulness, some self-hypnosis. Go back and do it again. And when I'm doing clinical hypnotherapy with people, I'll have them gauge their activation on a scale of 0 to 5. And we will intentionally, under hypnosis, raise their level of activation to at least a 3, and then we'll back off. And then we'll raise it to a 3 or maybe a 4, and we'll back off. And by the way, this is a technique that's well known in clinical hypnosis that's been very, very successful. And just to disagree with those cranks on Twitter, it's been around for many, 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 many decades, probably, 100 years or something like that, and very successful. So try that out. If you know a great experienced clinical hypnotherapist, maybe they can help you out with that. But let's get on to another part of the question in the remaining couple minutes that we have.
Well, and while she's looking for that, I actually have a real-life example of what Doc Heath was just talking about. When I first started, well, I've got a lot of real-life examples, but we're going to start with this one. When I first started dating my current husband, he really liked to listen to music very loud in his car, and that was something that I just...
That wasn't the previous husband, that's the current husband.
My only husband. My one and only, my sweetheart. He's precious.
We're not going to talk about all those other husbands. That's traumatic.
Yeah. But no, my husband, he liked to listen to music really loud in his car, which is fine. That's fine. But when I first started dating him, I didn't like loud noises, which I still am not a big fan. But my first instinct when I got in the car with him was to ask him to turn it down. But over time, I thought about it, and I was like, no. If he can jam out and enjoy it, why can't I jam out and enjoy it too? So I kind of mimicked the behavior that I wanted to have and told myself, hey, this is an okay thing. This is actually a really good thing. And so we would just put the windows down and sing at the top of our lungs and jam out. And now it's not really a big deal anymore. And
it's a moment-by-moment reprogramming yourself that I'm safe. And this aversive stimulus, I'm doing air quotes here for those not on a video, that aversive stimulus is not a danger to me.
Right.
And my emotion I'm experiencing is not a danger to me either.
Right.
Your emotions can never be a danger to you. One of the worst things in trauma, I find, are when people come to think that their emotions in and of themselves is a danger to them. What's left on the question, because we're about to run out of time?
I think didn't we not get all these? I think your meme.
Oh, right. I put a meme up
Yeah.
last week about normalizing, decatastrophizing, and differentiating. So 3 very important aspects of overcoming trauma responses. Normalizing, basically, this is going to be really fast. We may be able to do one on this later, a bigger one. But normalizing is basically just reminding yourself that the response is normal because of what happened. It's not going to remain your normal, but there's nothing dangerous about it, which is part of the decatastrophizing. And then differentiate. What's the difference between what happened today and what happened back then? So you can even talk to yourself about, hey, this is 2023. It is June, I don't really know what.
27th.
There we go, June 27th, 2023. I am an adult now. I'm not a child. Even if I ran into that person, they couldn't do anything to me. They could say words, but words can't hurt me. I get to decide what I do. So.
And take it in small steps,
Yes.
and remember that any kind of cognitive restructuring that you can do about anything in your life. It doesn't have to be about the trauma. It can be about standing in line at Walmart, at a stop sign. It can be
Riding a roller coaster.
well, yeah, that's it. You're riding a roller coaster. It can be anything. Cognitive restructuring about anything. The good thing about assimilation, we talked about over assimilation earlier, but the great thing about assimilation is the brain taking a skill set that you've learned in one situation and then assimilating to another and another and another. And assimilation is one of the most powerful techniques for healing trauma. Thank you for joining us. We'll catch you next week on Clubhouse.